Greetings, esteemed students of HillmanTok University. Welcome to week 3 of our summer session on Womanist Capitalism. Having explored capitalism's historical foundations and the overlooked economic contributions of women of color, today we turn our analytical lens to examine the contemporary workplace, a site where the legacies of white patriarchal capitalism continue to operate in more subtle yet equally damaging ways. I'd like to begin with two powerful quotes that frame our discussion for today. Audre Lorde stated, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." And my second quote for today is by Bell Hooks, and she notes, "Imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy maintains itself through the erasure of emotional labor." So these insights, these quotes will remind us that what we'll discuss today isn't merely about workplace inconveniences, but about systemic patterns of domination that require political resistance and collective healing. As we delve into this topic, I invite you to reflect on a personal level. What does it cost to show up in a space not designed for you? How do you experience being seen or not seen in work environments? So let's just take a minute to think about those two questions. I'll repeat them. The first question is, what does it cost to show up in a space not designed for you? What does it cost to show up in a space not designed for you? And my second question is, how do you experience being seen or not seen in work environments? You can put that in the discussion board. And I want to thank you for that moment of contemplation. This is a heavy topic, one that impacts a lot of our lives. So we're going to take this week's session a little slow. So let's now examine more systematically what we're calling the myth of modern capitalism. And let's start with the myth of meritocracy. We've heard that in the news a lot lately, but the modern workplace operates under the guise of meritocracy, a system supposedly based on merit, where the most qualified and hardest working individuals advance regardless of their identity. However, this narrative obscures how workplaces are structured to reproduce existing power hierarchies. As Thomas Piketty has demonstrated through extensive economic analysis, markets naturally amplify inequality unless deliberately regulated to do otherwise. The invisible hand doesn't correct for bias, it often magnifies it. Modern workplaces may claim neutrality in their policies and practices, but neutrality in a system built on historical inequality merely preserves existing advantages and disadvantages. So I want you to consider, for instance, how hiring and promotion practices that appear neutral often replicate existing power structures. When culture fit becomes a criterion for employment, whose culture sets the standard? And when leadership potential is assessed, whose model of leadership is being used as the template? When effective communication is evaluated, whose communication styles are privileged? Anna Louise Keating offers us a powerful framework through her concept of thresholds. She notes that thresholds are sites of transformation if we survive them. So for women of color in professional environments, each day represents a threshold experience, a liminal space where they must navigate between authenticity and acceptability, between resistance and survival. The workplace is not a neutral arena of merit-based competition, but rather a site where historical power dynamics are reproduced through seemingly objective structures and practices. Understanding this reality is crucial before we can envision and create alternatives like womanist capitalism. So the first toll women of color face, what we might call intersectional policing, in the workplace scrutiny that operates simultaneously at the intersections of gender, race, and family roles. This policing becomes particularly evident when we examine what researchers have termed the maternity wall. When you think about a wall and hitting it, like nothing about that sounds good. It sounds like somebody's going to get hurt, right? So, unlike the more commonly discussed glass ceiling, which also means somebody's going to get cut, the maternity wall represents a specific barrier that emerges when women become mothers. It manifests in assumptions about competence, ambition, and availability that disproportionately penalize mothers in the workplace. Studies consistently show that mothers are perceived as less committed, less competent, and less worthy of advancement, perceptions that aren't applied to fathers who often receive a fatherhood bonus in terms of perceived reliability and commitment. For women of color, especially, this maternity wall is even steeper. Already navigating racial and gender stereotypes, motherhood introduces another dimension of identity that triggers additional biases. Black mothers, for instance, must contend with harmful stereotypes about single motherhood while simultaneously managing workplace expectations that often assume the presence of robust support systems. The cumulative effect of these intersecting forms of discrimination is a profound mental health toll. Research increasingly documents the psychological impact of workplace discrimination on women of color, including higher rates of anxiety, depression, and even symptoms similar to PTSD. And as I'm speaking, this isn't hyperbole. The constant vigilance required to navigate hostile environments, the regular experiences of invalidation, and the pressure to represent one's entire identity group create genuine psychological trauma. As Bell Hooks notes, this emotional burden represents a form of unpaid labor that remains invisible yet essential to the functioning of capitalist systems. The emotional labor of managing microaggressions, code switching, and maintaining professional composure in the face of subtle or overt discrimination constitutes an additional workload that goes unrecognized and uncompensated. So let's talk about microaggressions as modern chains. Let's examine this more closely. Those seemingly microaggressions are those seemingly small comments, questions, or actions that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards women of color or marginalized groups. In the workplace, these might include statements like, and tell me if you've ever heard of any of these statements in the discussion board. You're so articulate, implying surprise that a person of color can speak professionally. Or, are you the diversity hire? Suggesting someone's position comes from tokenism rather than qualification. Or this one, can you explain what Black women think about this issue? Expecting an individual to represent their entire identity group. And while each of these may seem minor in isolation, their cumulative impact creates what we might call modern chains, subtle but powerful constraints on full participation and advancement. Microaggressions function as tools of cultural domination in several ways. So first, they constantly remind marginalized individuals of their perceived otherness, reinforcing dominant cultural narratives about who belongs and who doesn't. Second, they create double binds. If you address the microaggression, you risk being labeled oversensitive or difficult or angry. If you ignore it, you internalize the harmful message. And we don't want to be internalizing any harmful messages. And third, they divert mental and emotional resources away from professional tasks toward managing these interpersonal dynamics. And this leads us to recognize what I called unpaid survival work. The invisible labor of code switching, emotional management, and strategic response that women of color must perform simply to exist in professional spaces. This work consumes significant cognitive and emotional resources, yet remains unacknowledged in performance evaluations or compensation structures. Yeah, we need to be paid for experiencing some of these microaggressions. The constant stream of microaggressions creates lasting psychological damage that accumulates over time. What might appear to privileged observers as minor issues become in reality death by 1,000 cuts or 1,000 hits against the wall. So these small wounds that collectively create profound harm. This harm extends beyond the individual to impact broader communities, as talented individuals may withdraw from toxic environments, reinforcing existing patterns of exclusion. Beyond microaggressions, there are broader power dynamics that structure professional experiences for women of color. Four patterns are particularly prevalent. So, first, silencing, where ideas from women of color are often ignored when presented, only to be celebrated later when repeated by someone with more perceived privilege. This pattern not only denies recognition, but also reinforces implicit hierarchies about whose voice matters, when all voices should matter, right? Second, tone policing, where passion is labeled as aggression and assertiveness becomes difficult to work with. Women of color face a narrower band of acceptable emotional expression, particularly Black women who must navigate harmful stereotypes about anger. Third, tokenization, being asked to represent your entire race or gender or age group with questions like, what do Black women think about this? This transforms complex identities into simplified representatives, denying individuality while imposing additional burdens. Fourth, the paradox of hypervisibility slash invisibility, being simultaneously scrutinized for mistakes while overlooked for achievements. This contradictory position creates a precarious professional existence where one is both too visible and not visible enough. These power dynamics aren't accidental, but serve to maintain existing hierarchies in seemingly neutral professional contexts. They represent the modern manifestation of patriarchal capitalism's ability to adapt its mechanisms of control while maintaining its fundamental structure. So, what can we do about this? Strategies for resilience and resistance. While identifying these systemic problems is essential, equally important is developing strategies for resilience and resistance. I want to share a framework that can help navigate these challenging workplace dynamics while preserving one's well being and your dignity. First, community building. The isolation often experienced by women of color in professional settings can be encountered through intentional network creation. I don't think I said that right, so let me say that again. So these things, this isolation that women of color experience in professional settings can be countered through intentional network creation. And these networks provide validation, strategic advice, and emotional support that institutions rarely offer. As Audre Lorde reminds us, without community, there is no liberation. So you want to seek out mentors, you want to seek out allies and peers who understand your experience and can offer both guidance and solidarity. And this is so important because oftentimes women of color or Black women may be the first person in their family to be in a certain professional situation or environment. And you can't rely on your family or someone who's not been in that position to be able to help navigate you through that position. So that's why it's so important to find mentors and allies and peers that are experiencing what you're going through. And I say this because these connections aren't merely social, they're survival infrastructure. Second, radical self care. When Audre Lorde wrote that self care is not self indulgence, but self preservation and an act of political warfare, she was acknowledging that in systems designed to deplete and diminish marginalized people, preserving one's well being becomes radical and revolutionary. This means setting boundaries, honoring your needs, and refusing the martyrdoms that professional settings often demand from women of color. It means recognizing that your value extends far beyond your productivity and showing up every day. Third, knowledge is power. Knowledge as power, I should say. Naming and documenting your experiences provides both personal clarity and potential leverage, just in case you need it. Keep records of microaggressions, exclusionary practices, and disparate treatment. Document your achievements and contributions meticulously. This documentation serves dual purposes. One, it validates your perceptions against gaslighting narratives and provides evidence should you need to advocate for yourself institutionally. Fourth, collective action. While individual strategies are necessary, they're insufficient for systemic change. So that's where collective advocacy comes into play for policy changes around hiring, promotion, family leave, and workplace culture. It is essential. This might mean forming employee resource groups, participating in union activities, or creating informal collections to advance equity initiatives. And remember that the most significant workplace protections women enjoy today, from sexual harassment policies to family leave, came not from institutional goodwill, but from organized collective demand. So these strategies form a pyramid of resistance. Community at the top, providing immediate support, self care, creating sustainability, knowledge building power, and collective action forming the foundational base for systemic transformation. And lastly, my last slide here, reclamation is healing. So beyond resistance, there's a deeper work of healing and transformation that merits our attention. The harms experienced in professional environments can create lasting wounds that require intentional healing processes. The first step in this healing journey is to acknowledge the harm. Recognize workplace traumas for what they are, systemic issues, not personal failings. When we contextualize our experiences within broader patterns of oppression, we can begin to release the self doubt and internalized blame that often accompanies workplace discrimination. Your pain is valid. Your pain is valid. I'm going to say that one last time. Your pain is valid. Your experiences are real. Your experiences are real. And I'm going to say it one more time. Your experiences are real. Your body and your spirit have innate wisdom in their responses to harmful environments. Next, I want you to reclaim your narrative. The stories we tell about our professional experiences shape how we carry them. Journal, if you're a journaler, about your experiences. It'll help you provide space to process emotions and identify patterns. Share your story when and if you choose with selected audiences you trust, transforming isolating experiences into connected ones. Your story is not just about pain, but about resilience, creativity, and survival against significant obstacles. Finally, envision transformation. As Anna Louise Keating writes, our struggle is also a healing. It is not just resistance, it is reclamation. End quote. And this reclamation involves imagining and creating professional environments that honor the full humanity and contributions of women of color. It means refusing to accept exclusionary workplaces as inevitable and instead engaging in what Adrienne Maree Brown calls visionary fiction, the practice of imagining the workplaces and economies we actually deserve. And this healing work isn't a luxury or an afterthought to real professional advancement. It's the essential foundation that makes sustainable participation possible. It transforms workplace survival from an individual burden into a collective journey of transformation. So, as we conclude today's session, I want to leave you with a powerful insight from Anna Louise Keating when she states, "Our struggle is also a healing. It is not just resistance, it is reclamation." This reminds us that the work we're doing in this course isn't merely about critique, it's about reclaiming our humanity, our dignity, and our economic agency in systems designed to deny these things. The reclamation is both personal and collective, it's both theoretical and deeply practical. So for next week, please complete your journal reflection. I want you to describe a workplace experience where your race, your gender, or your identity influenced how you were treated. How did you respond? What might healing look like for you or for others? And this reflective work will help prepare us for next week's exploration of the prophetic light, Woman is Capitalism Defined, where we'll begin to articulate alternatives to the problems we've identified. Thank you again for your engagement today. Your presence and participation constitutes acts of resistance against the very systems we're analyzing. Have a great day.